Title card. Changes to data classification. What leaders need to know.
Hi, thanks everybody for being here. I am Heather Johnston. I'm an IT policy writer and analyst in the Office of Cybersecurity and DoIT. It's my job to help coordinate IT policy across the university. So I am one of the two co-chairs of the Data Classification Initiative along with Lisa Johnston, and I will let Lisa introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. No relation to Heather. Happy to be here. My name is Lisa Johnston, and I'm the Director of Data Governance. I work in the unit called DAPR, Data Academic Planning and Institutional Research. I'll turn it over to Sue.
Speaker video feed in upper right.
So I'm Sue Wire. I am the LNS Security Officer for the College of LNS. I perform risk reviews for purchases of software and cloud services in the college, and I weigh in on local processes. So with the advent of tools like Betty Blocks and Koali, having a shared understanding of data classifications and of the safe ways to store those classified data has become critical. I'll hand it over to Craig.
Thanks, Sue. I am Craig Cook. I am an organizational change manager within DoIT, their portfolio project management office, or PPMO. And I was asked to join this team to help advise on some of the change management efforts that'll be necessary for this. I'll pass off to Stephanie here.
Hi, all. I'm Stephanie Johnson. I work for DoIT within the Office of Cybersecurity, Risk Management, and Compliance. And the reason I really wanted to be part of this project is because data classification is such a big part of the risk assessment process, just like Sue mentioned. I work with data from all areas across campus, and I believe it's really important that we get data classification right so we can make sure that we're safeguarding it appropriately. So happy to be here. Thanks.
And the final member of our team is Jeanette School, also from the DoIT PPMO, and she was not able to join us today, but she is part of the steering team and was instrumental in today's presentation. So moving on, let's start with a little quick poll, and there is a shortened link that I'm putting in the chat. So for people in the room, this may be easier. What we'd like to get your input here at this Padlet.
Slide. Data classification quick poll.
And Heather, if you want to open up the Padlet, I also threw the short URL in there.
Great. Let me stop sharing my slides. And whoops. And share the Padlet instead. There we go.
Heather, I'm not seeing your screen. I don't know about others.
Let's see.
Wait.
How about now?
Yes, it's coming.
Okay, great. Okay, so basically 3 questions today. How does data classification impact your work? How do you use data classification policy?
Answers from individuals appear beneath the questions on a page on Padlet.com in a web browser.
Seeing some answers come in impacts my work every day in decision making on sharing or not sharing student data with those requesting it. Security controls, backup, retention, data storage and security. It informs risk. Again, storage options. Things are really flooding in now. I'm missing some of them, but working with PHI, working with DAPR and others to design meaningful employee learning. So lots of good input here. We really appreciate this. Yeah, it looks like yeah, a lot of you are really involved in this, and it's going to impact what you do a lot. So I'll stop sharing the Padlet now and go back to the slides. If I can find them, hold on just 1 second, sorry. All right, I think we're back in business now. There we go.
Slide. Data classification is critical to university business functions.
Okay, so I will turn things over to Lisa.
All right, great. Well, we're going to share out some more about a data classification initiative that is already underway here for UW-Madison. As you can see from many of the responses in the room, from your own experiences, data classification is a part of many of our university business functions. We use data classification as a part of our, providing access to data through data governance, through data stewards. Cybersecurity, you heard from Stephanie and Sue, we use data classification as the basis for how we're going to review potential tools that might have data in them. Research data management uses data classification to determine how we store data, how we manage that data throughout its life cycle. We use classifications as a part of our endpoint security management, who's accessing what data where and how. The remote work, everybody who has to fill out a remote work form, there's a question. It includes what kind of data are you accessing as a part of your work? So even if you're working remotely, you may be accessing a protected institutional data that is, again, that level of risk might increase. Records retention uses data classification as a basis of decisions of how long we're going to keep certain things. And then risk management and compliance, a lot of our policies actually include a step where we think about what is the data classification, and that's going to impact how we treat that data. So it's really widespread. So as you can imagine, changes in this space are going to have a large impact on a lot of people and a lot of what we do. You can go to the next slide, Heather.
Slide.
But why do we need a change in this space? Well, we've got sort of a complicated policy landscape today. Many of you may be familiar, we do have a data classification policy. This is UW 504. 504 was effective in 2009, so it's an older policy. And basically, what it does is describe what our university considers sensitive data. And as a subset of that sensitive data, we actually have even more risky types of data that we classify as restricted. So that policy details both of those levels.
Slide.
In practice, however, we actually have extended our data classification schema to include 2 additional types of data. So in practice, our data stewards and others who are responsible for classifying data definitely use the restricted label and the sensitive label per that UW 504 policy. But we also use 2 additional labels to help us understand different types of data. And those include internal data and public data, or data that has been reviewed and approved for putting up on a public website or releasing into a public data repository, for example.
Slide.
It gets even more complicated, however, I think this graphic shows it, in the fact that UW system in 2016, so many years after Madison's original policy came out, they released a data classification policy that describes a different schema for classifying data across UW system. And this one describes data in terms of 3 tiers: low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And you'll see we've done an attempt at mapping to what we think those tiers relate back to the ones that we use here at Madison. I will also note that just in an analysis that we did, all the other University of Wisconsin institutions are also using that UW system classification schema except for Madison.
Slide.
So obviously the goal here would be alignment. If we are not using classification consistently, either across the system, but also here at UW-Madison, it doesn't really do its job. It doesn't help us understand the data, and it creates more complexity than is needed. So we really want to try to align these policies, simplify how we are classifying data, reduce that confusion, and therefore strengthen compliance and decrease our security risks. So all of those policies would need to be in alignment, and our practices of how we apply them need to be in alignment.
Slide.
And I will turn it over to the next speaker.
Discovering a path forward.
So, since UW 504 is an IT policy, we pursued the IT policy development process for what to do about this policy. So, the Policy Planning and Analysis Team, which is a standing subcommittee of the IT Committee or ITC, recognized that there was an issue with data classification, and they chartered a discovery team in the fall of 2023 to kind of examine the policy, the practices, and kind of recommend a course of action. So this discovery team included representatives from 10 schools, colleges, and divisions. And then beginning in the winter of 2023, the end of 2023, the discovery team conducted some research. So there was a campus-wide survey that was launched. There were 536 successful responses, and we also conducted some follow-up interviews. And then we also conducted a gap analysis of our existing policy, systems existing policy at peer institutions and in related industries. We examined their policies, standards, practices, all of that. And then in the spring of 2024, the discovery team issued a report of its findings and recommendations. Those recommendations were accepted by the PAT, the Policy Planning and Analysis Team, and by ITC. And then in the fall of 2025, so a little bit earlier this year, the initiative was chartered to begin to move forward with those recommendations. And I am going to turn it over to, I believe, Craig. Sorry, Craig.
No worries.
Slide. Implementing the discovery team's recommendations. The Data Classification Initiative.
All right. So just a bit of a background. This was based off of the findings of that discovery group. Dave is linked a link to the findings, kind of a read only that folks can look at after this, but I am just going to touch on some of the metrics that came out of those interviews and surveys and just how they relate to kind of the recommendations and what's guiding this data classification initiative. So something to note is that there's a plan to retire UW 504, which is our current data classification policy, in favor of SIS 1031. So in the discovery survey, some things that were revealed is that 1/3 of respondents were unfamiliar with UW-Madison's classification policy, and over half of those said they didn't even know it existed. So the policy we have now, many folks weren't aware of it. Nearly half of the respondents who handle research data were unfamiliar with how classification works at UW-Madison. When asked where they go for help, respondents listed 16 different sources with no single authoritative place to turn. Staff working with internal or sensitive data often could not clearly distinguish what they had, reinforcing some overlap and confusion between those two levels. So if you remember on the earlier slide, there was kind of a merging of those two sources into that low data tier. And then survey and interview themes consistently showed that the definitions are too complex, examples are insufficient, and the system is not intuitive, leading to some inconsistent use. From these surveys, from the survey and these interviews, respondents did overwhelmingly ask for things like clear UW-Madison specific examples, real world scenarios and use cases, simplified, easier to apply categories, just-in-time tools embedded in workflow, centralized authoritative guidance, better training tied to roles and responsibilities, which have very much defined kind of the definition of success for this initiative. Respondents also showed strong interest in automation, including system-level flags and warnings, machine-readable classifications, and decision trees or guided questionnaires. So exploring those opportunities is also kind of a part of this initiative. And with the transition to the three-tier SIS 1031 model, we have an opportunity to increase campus-wide awareness, simplify and standardize data classification practices, and deliver modern tools, examples, and guidance that make classification easier and more consistent across the university.
Slide. Initiative objectives.
Out of that discovery effort, these were the initial objectives that were recommended and approved by the PAT, as Heather mentioned. And I'll hand it off to Sue now to discuss how the data classification initiative will organize to accomplish these objectives, and later on a little more detail on timelines and some specifics about these objectives.
Slide. Team structure, sponsors and steering team. A diagram of leadership, teams, and stakeholder collaboration.
Thanks, Craig. So here on this slide, you can see, first of all, our list of sponsors. Allison Latart, who's the Vice Provost for Dapper, and the Chief, oh, hang on, my slides all went awry. Allison Latart is the Vice Provost for Dapper and the Chief Data and Analytics Officer. Didier Contas is the Vice Provost for IT and the Chief Information Officer. Our steering team is listed, and you've heard all of us introduce ourselves. Our co-chairs are Lisa Johnston from Dapper and Heather Johnston from Cybersecurity. And then we have Craig Cook from the Do It PPMO, Stephanie Johnson from Risk Management and Compliance, and Jeanette School also from the Do It PPMO. And then you have me. I'm Sue Wire. I'm part of the Information Technology Services Group, which is part of LNS administration, somewhat newly formed. Everyone on the steering team has a really special interest in data classification and how it impacts our services and our systems. For me, it's risk reviews. For other people, it's other parts of data classification. Lisa, Heather, Stephanie, and I were on the initial group that worked on the report. Stephanie and I actually did some of the follow-up interviews. And as Craig mentioned, we were really struck by how many places people went for help and for the desire for guidance. We had people volunteering to write guidance if somebody would vet it and publish it. And so we knew there was more work to be done there. Much of the work of our 5 objectives will be done in the working groups that you can see in the diagram. 2 of those are going to kick off. We were hoping before Christmas, but now I'm thinking probably it'll be in the new year. And those are the top 2, the policy update and, oh, can you go back, please? The policy update and resource development group and the schema augmentation and systems integration work group. And then the lower 2 are going to kick off later in winter. And those are the training work group and the research work group. And each of those has a really diverse group of stakeholders, everybody from faculty and staff to Do It engineers and Do It enterprise support teams and data stewards and deans. So it gets very complicated, and we're really hoping, in fact, I think the success of this effort depends on having good stakeholder involvement in the subgroups, because we need to have examples and training and a shared understanding of these classifications across all of campus, not just in IT, not just in purchasing, not just in HR, but across everybody's campus.
Slide. Near-term working groups.
Go ahead and let's advance. Thank you. So the near-term working groups, there are 2. Each of the working groups serves one or two of the 5 objectives. So the policy update and resource development group is going to retire 504 and provide some guidance on implementing that new 3-tier system from SIS 1031. And we saw how that works. The table here on this page also shows public and internal roughly mapped to low risk, sensitive to moderate risk, and restricted to high risk. It's not quite that clean cut. There are some differences in what we considered, say, restricted versus what UW system considered high risk. So there will need to be some clarifications made, and that's all part of what this group will do. The second group is the schema augmentation and system integration group. They will establish standards and guidance for enriching data with contextual information. So what that means is that we may know that something is high risk, but we'd like to provide some context for that. Why is it high risk? Maybe it's HIPAA data. Maybe it's PHI, personal health data. Maybe it's extremely sensitive human subjects research. All of that might make something high risk, but it also tells us more about it. If it's HIPAA data, there are specific ways it needs to be stored. If it's FERPA data, there's a little more flexibility, which I think just makes it harder, frankly. But knowing what that data is, knowing the content of it is really important. The second objective for this group, the second group is schema augmentation. The second objective for that group is to promote consistency through just-in-time guidance and automation. So this is taking a look at our enterprise systems, and can any of this be done automatically? It's also taking a look at some of possibly our forms, maybe the remote work form where it says, what kind of data do you have? Maybe we provide a link so people can look and see, what kind of data do I have? In my experience, everyone thinks their data is internal. And I think we don't always think about what would happen if that data were released. So those are the 2 parts of schema augmentation and system integration. And you might be saying, why is it important to identify that and have that contextual information? Why do we need to know what kind of data this is and where it is? And I'll say this, there's a tenet of cybersecurity that says you can't protect things you don't know about. That has led over the last few years, I'm sure you've noticed there have been an advancement in how we manage devices and wanting to manage devices and being able to tell, if something is missing patches, things like that. That's because those are valuable assets and we can't protect them if we don't know about them. Now, this tenet continues into data management because data is really just another asset. We don't usually think of it that way, but it is. It's an asset and it's far more valuable than any of our hardware or software. And we need to protect it. And it's not something we've done in the past the way that we should.
Slide, future working groups.
So let's move on to the next group or to the next slide. So these are the 2 committees that we talked about convening a little later in winter. The research data group will work toward resolving challenges with classifying research data. There is no data steward for research data. There is a data steward for all the other kinds of enterprise data we have. PIs have the job of classifying their data along with everything else that they're doing to organize their research. So this is something that would perhaps give some assistance to classification and maybe supply some shortcuts. If you have this type of data, then maybe you should be looking at this kind of storage. So that's the research data group. We're hoping that we can hand that work off to OVCR for them to continue implementation on. The final group is training. That will provide training in the new 3-tier scheme to data stewards and to staff that need that training. We're hoping some of the people from the policy update and resource development group might continue on because the resources they develop will certainly be needed as part of the training corpus. So those 4 groups, 2 starting now and 2 starting later, will be the mechanisms that we use to achieve all of our objectives. And if any of those groups sound familiar, down at the bottom, you can see that we are looking for people. If you have an interest because you're a data analyst, or if you have an interest because you work in finance or HR or IT, we're looking for people with diverse viewpoints. And if you are interested or you know someone who you think would be really good and you want to volunteer them, go ahead and contact either Lisa Johnston or Heather Johnston, and their emails are at the bottom of the slide. They're also in the directory, and I'm sure we're going to have their emails later on a slide as well. One last thing. So data is really a foundation for everything we do on our campus, and that includes instruction and administration and research. This team, these groups, will be working closely with other initiatives on campus that are relying on data and data classification as part of what they need, as part of the foundation for them to achieve their objectives. You've probably heard of the Smart Access Project. That's creating more effective ways to protect our networks and our data. That group will be especially important when we start looking at the system integrations. We're hoping to pair with them. The data security management policy is new and it's just starting to go into development. And that will basically provide a framework to make sure data is securely managed and stored in the appropriate places. West and EAP, that's the Workday and Enterprise Solutions team, and the Enterprise Analytics Platform. Those are new to me and I have to write them down so I remember what they do. They're working with Workday security roles, and the Workday security roles control what data one can see in Workday and what transactions you have access to. So that's another one where they're looking at what type of data is this. And finally, the firewall design team. And they're putting together recommendations to modernize our firewall design and improve our firewall performance. And that includes identifying, for example, high-risk areas that need to have secure access and secure monitoring. So all of those groups are really tightly related to the data classification initiative. And we're hoping that we can work to be in alignment with all of them and what they need. So again, think about volunteering or recommending someone to volunteer, and I'm going to turn things to Stephanie to talk about timeline.
Slide. What to expect when?
Yeah, so thanks, Sue. What to expect when? So in the beginning of next year, we're actually going to kick off our working groups 1 and 2. And we're going to publish some information on our new website. And then we'll also make the formal announcement of intention to retire UW 504. And then later on in the year, we're going to have a little bit more information published on our website, more specifically, more about the schema augmentation taxonomy. And then we're also going to kick off our working groups 3 and 4. And then at the end of next year, we will publish some additional resources for how to implement the CIS 1031 data classification policy. And then at the very beginning of 2027, we will have officially retired UW 504. And then we're going to continue to align the major data systems to the new data classification schema, and that will happen throughout the remainder of 2028 in this project. Next slide.
Slide.
And there's some really, really good data classification initiative resources out there. Thanks, Dave, for dropping those links into the chat. So the first 2 up top here are going to be the 2 data classification policies, CIS 1031 and then UW 504. And then this middle one here, the data stewards, is a really, really great resource. Lots of folks across campus do have questions about their data, often coming to cybersecurity and Dapper to kind of have a little bit better understanding of their data classification. But we tend to really rope in those data stewards in those different data domains, and they are awesome, awesome resources for you. So please reach out to them if you have questions on how your data falls within the different schemas. And then we did publish an article of our work in EDUCAUSE, so that's out there for y'all to read. And then we do have our official report for our recommendation for action for this initiative.
Slide.
And then we are super interested in getting some of your feedback on how you would like to be notified about changes in the data classification space. So we have a link to Padlet there. If Heather, you could share that. Or Craig, thank you. And then, yeah, just drop some ideas on how you'd like to be communicated to. I mean, our goal is to really try to reach as many of you as possible, since we all handle all sorts of areas of data. So if you could give us some of your ideas, that would be super helpful. I will say that we're going to primarily communicate through newsletters, email distribution lists, and obviously our website. So please share your ideas and we will gather that feedback.
The page on Padlet.com in a web browser. Individuals post answers.
And what do we have here on the Padlet? Would be nice to have a website to see progress. Yep, absolutely. We will have that in place. Email. Yep, great. Webinars. Okay. These are good ideas. Perfect.
Yeah, some of these were populated at the top of the presentation, so we'll wait another minute or two. Some additional things might be coming in now that you've heard some more.
Possible office hours. That's a good one. Okay, great.
Yeah, we're seeing some things here that we haven't thought of yet as a group, so we really appreciate this input. This is very helpful. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing that. I'm gonna reshare our slides just so that you once again have Lisa's and my contact information. Let me find that. It is here.
Slide. Questions? Lisa Johnston, Steering Team Co-Chair, LR Johnston at wisc.edu.
All right.
Heather Johnston, Steering Team Co-Chair, HB Johnston at wisc.edu.
So we will open the floor to questions now. Again, you have Lisa's email address here and my email address here. We want to answer questions now, but if you don't think of every question you have right now and you want to contact us later, or you want to volunteer for one of those working groups or recommend someone to participate in one of those working groups, Lisa and I are happy to have you reach out to us anytime. So let me stop there and see what questions. I don't see anything in the, oh wait, hold on. Yep, I don't see anything in the chat yet. But you can put questions in the chat and Dave, I think, is coordinating questions in the room.
On ready to go.
Awesome. Hi, Deanna Schneider, IT Director for the Division of Extension. I'm just curious where you're fitting in going through the process of reclassifying all of the tools that we currently use on campus and what data classification they can be used with. So currently, for instance, SharePoint can't use sensitive or restricted data. Is that just going to be defaulting to now it can't use moderate or high risk, or are you actually going to relook at all of those tools in the process?
I can take a stab at that. What we're going to be doing is working with all of the tool owners to kind of understand how they are currently documenting the types of data that can be used in their tool. Not all tools have that gone through that process. So in the cases where they have done that risk assessment and they have been promoting, the appropriate types of data that can be used with that tools, we will probably just help them transition to the new schema. In other cases where there is no guidance available, or maybe there's a question about what kind of data is used in that tool, we probably would be referencing them back to the cybersecurity office to do a risk review. I'm looking at my colleagues in the cybersecurity office here, Sue and Stephanie. I'm sure that we don't want to do that for every tool. We just don't have the capacity to do that for every tool right now. But we'll probably need to take a tiered approach and also take that schema transformation approach.
Yeah, I'll add
And
one of the early sub-objectives for that working group one and kind of preparing for the transition is to capture some of those major systems and kind of think through how we're going to work with those groups to assess some of the possibilities for updating those classifications within their systems. So working groups will be kind of defining how that path moves forward. And so there will be more information kind of as those groups continue to develop.
and I'll just add, Deanna, this is something that is really near and dear to my heart. I dream of a page that says, hey, I have FERPA data. Where can I put this? And feel confident that it's safe and confident that it's okay, because many people assume, many people assume that if it's an enterprise system, I can put my data in it. And it turns out that's not exactly so. It's a big problem. Being more transparent about where data is stored is really important. And we have so many common cases of data types, and we're hoping some of those contextual tags will address those common use cases. But I am very, very hopeful that we can come out with that kind of advice either through this group or through Smart Access.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about that is there will be some additional information kind of on the side separate from this initiative, talking about some of those appropriate enterprise options to be able to store things like student data. So that information and awareness will be coming in the future.
Closes slides.
Hey, thanks, everybody. There is a question in the chat from Megan Yaki. Craig mentioned that your survey revealed a real lack of awareness regarding data classification policies on campus. Is required training part of your initiative? I think I can say first that this group, it's not our place to require anything of anyone. So we're going to be making some recommendations for training. We're going to be developing some materials to support training. But then it will be up to others to, and we will work with people to make decisions about what may or may not be required and of whom. Anybody else on the team have anything to say about that?
I will just put a plug. We do have a training available today that talks about our data classification structures as it stands today. It's called Data at UW. We actually just moved it over into Workday in the last month, so happy to throw the link to that existing training if anyone wants to share it out with their teams.
And I just put the link in the chat, so it is there. I think this is really good, and it really talks about how you need to think about what your data is. It does not include the 3-tier system at this point, but it would be great if we could add that in, and who knows, that may be something we can do as part of this initiative.
The large group in a conference room with tables, laptops, and name badges.
All right, I have a question here. This is Pete Bogoszewski from School of Ed. First, thanks for this talk. This was great. Appreciate all the work that you are doing, and really appreciate going to the 3-tier system. I'll just make a plug there. My question is about the working groups, those future working groups. Is there going to be a formal call, or is there a place where I can get more information and see if there are people from within my teams that might align really well with those working groups?
I can field that. This is sort of related to one of the questions in the chat, so I'm going to read that at the same time. How will you approach communications? Are you working with a campus comms team? So we are working with Do It Communications. We are planning to publish an article, in Tech News. And we are developing a website about the data classification initiative. So there will be a website describing the initiative. It will describe what those working groups are going to look like. Later on, there will be a different web page that will live on with information about data classification. But what's being put together now is information about the initiative itself. So you will have that. If you have specific questions about any of the working groups and which members of your team may or may not be a good fit, again, please feel free to reach out to Lisa or me, or both of us. We're happy to chat with you on Teams or otherwise discuss with you so that we can make sure we're getting good representation and you have some confidence that team members you might recommend would be a good fit. Lisa, you
I'll
have
also add, I'm not going to put Pete back on the spot here since I think the microphone wandered away from him, but please do, in that third question in the Padlet, drop some of the channels through which you think this would be good to communicate, and we can kind of continue that. I will say I did see some things in there about like ITCCC and DTLG, ITC, those sorts of things. But please do recommend some additional channels in there that you think would be effective to kind of communicate this call for volunteers.
Hello, my name is Mark Siemens. I'm on the research cyber infrastructure team, and I have a question. When on the what success looks like slide, when talking about the schema augmentation and system integration group, mentioned that there's a the vision to enrich data with contextual information, and later on, one of the presenters mentioned like tagging data with that contextual information. I wanted to just ask, what's the vision behind like kind of what a workflow would look like to get that, enrich that data, or what would that look like? Yeah, kind of what's that current perspective there?
I can jump in on that. Thanks for that question. Our vision for this is to have a controlled vocabulary that we can all use consistently, and then that vocabulary would have definitions that describe what that tag or label means. So if you're using it in just a document, you might be able to understand it, and it would map to maybe the use of those tags or labels in a system. I think there also will need to be a process for recommending and approving new tags or labels to expand on that schema, so that we can kind of have a process where those get vetted and reviewed, and we build out that taxonomy going forward, because there's certainly going to be new types of data, new regulations, or new risks that come up that we'll want to account for in our controlled vocabulary for those tags. I don't have all of the answers to that, of course, because I'm sure there's going to be more that the working group will identify in that space. But I think that's sort of the foundation that we're going to build from.
Yeah, I do just want to add to that second working group about systems integration, schema augmentation. Lisa was highlighting some of the work that group will be doing. It will be out of scope for this initiative to like procure additional licensing or set up new systems and that sort of thing. The expectation for that second working group would be to do some evaluation of what is currently available, what we already have access to that could help with this work. However, this is where some of the tie-in to some of these other initiatives like smart access is important. That is a space in which there could be some exploration on what more could we do in this space? What could we add that would make securing our data more effective and easier? And one of the reasons why we'll be working to keep those two initiatives connected.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. I don't know if there are any in the room.
Not that I'm seeing at this point.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for being here. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate your input in the quick poll. And you will be hearing more about this initiative in the new year. So thank you so much.
Where can we learn more for now? Those links that Dave put in the chat there, feel free to repost them, Dave, if you get a chance. And soon a website. We don't have that yet, but that's what we got right now.
So thank you all very much for those in person. I hope you enjoy your extended break before lunch downstairs.